Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be working on Unit 2 today. The topic of Unit 2 is walking through the fundamentals of building pages using HTML. As always, I do have the topic list at the top here, and it kind of details all the things that are talked about in this chapter of significance, and there's a lot, because this is really the foundation of all the web work you're going to do in this program. If you don't know the material in this chapter, you're going to kind of be lost for the rest of the degree. That's why it's really that important. There's a couple of links that I've thrown in here, and I'm sure that Wendy last week probably shared these with you as well. The one thing I want to point out to you is this site that we have access to, and in the old days they didn't actually link it up on the sidebar, but it's also on the sidebar, lynda.com. If you've ever explored that interface, that is an amazing site full of complete courses on a gazillion different technology topics. Some really basic, some really advanced, and some really unique niches too, honestly. I point it out because it is a free resource to you as a student. Sometimes when you go out on YouTube and you start looking up stuff on doing web page things, you come across these little videos. And some of those, like tutorial videos that you actually encounter, are snippets of the courses in Lynda. And the reason they do that, of course, is to try to lure you in to pay the subscription. And if you were to subscribe to that service, I forget what it is now, it's probably like 50, 60 bucks a month. But you know what? If you're self-training, it's well worth it. It's a lot cheaper than going to school, and it's a lot cheaper than going to like some boot camp that costs $10,000 or something. The instruction is top-notch. In fact, one of our web instructors here at Gateway has done videos for lynda.com. Christian has done videos for lynda.com, so you may actually encounter some of his videos depending on the topics you're looking at. All right, the other site I want to point you to is W3 Schools. And W3 Schools is based, comes from an organization called the W3C. So what does W3 stand for? WWW, World Wide Web. And the C stands for Consortium. The World Wide Web Consortium is the international body that oversees all the standards for all the web languages. So when HTML5 became a standard, it was this organization that developed and approved the standard. And why that's important is because our browsers work on standards to render web pages so they look the same regardless of device, operating system, or browser that you use. Hypothetically, you should be able to get it to look the same on every platform. In the old days, and I'm not talking that long ago, prior to HTML5 becoming standardized, it became standardized January 2014. Prior to that point, it was really kind of a crapshoot to get your stuff looking consistent across browsers, to the point where it was extremely frustrating. Especially with Internet Explorer, it kind of had its own rules. That's why they came out with Edge, because Internet Explorer didn't display stuff correctly. And then you had all these different issues with like older versions, newer versions, and a lot of that's been ironed out now, so you guys are entering into a world where the standards really are working. But it's still important to code for the standards so that your documents look consistent. Now, in terms of what is on this site, this is a really, really useful resource for learning about tags and how to write web pages in lots of different languages. And if you scroll through here, you're going to see there's not just HTML here and CSS, which are the two languages really that we're focusing on in this class. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff if you start scrolling through.
That's not even that bad, even to see it on CSS or something right now.
Well, the important thing to know is if you're looking for a quick little piece of information on how you do a tag correctly, per the standards, this is the place you come. Why? Because they set the standards. Here's the problem with going out to the web, folks. If you're working on, let's say, dropping certain type of code onto a web page. You do a search, you find some results. You don't know if the thing you're looking at might have been created quite a while ago and not created correctly on top of it all. And you're copying the code, and then it kind of works, but then it kind of doesn't, and you can't figure out why. I would always prefer, if you're trying to answer a question, you come here first, because they set the standards. It's really kind of the bottom line of it. The other really fun part about this, if you guys haven't explored this, is they do a lot of stuff where they show these basic examples, and here's the basic structure of a page right there. And then they have this cool little try-it-yourself editor where you can come in here and you can, type some stuff in, hit the run button, and it shows up on the other side of the screen. You don't need an editor or any fancy tools. You just need your browser. So you just want to try something and see how it works. You can pop into this environment really quick, experiment, and learn. It is not just beginners that use this site. That's the other thing I want to tell you. We use this site. The teachers use the site. It's like, how do you do, oh yeah, I forgot. Oh yeah, there it is. That's right, okay. Or guess what? They always invent new stuff too that we have to learn. Where are you going to learn it from? They set the standards usually first, and then they print the books. And then they create the websites. So that's just a helpful tip for y'all. All right, so 2 useful websites for kind of enhancing your learning, and really a go-to spot for answers and help, and quick little tutorials. And then if you want to zoom ahead of where we're at in class, and you want to do much more advanced work because you're ready for it, please feel free. Why not? It's not going to hurt. You'll also notice that in the previous unit, I had you go in and do the pre-tests, the HTML, CSS, and optionally JavaScript. And I just want to refresh you, if you haven't done that yet, please do it. Okay? And you're not being graded on what score you get, because frankly, it's irrelevant. What I'm doing is I'm trying to set a baseline for where you're coming in at. I want to see what kind of, if you get a 5%, I don't care. You're new to the course, right? That's fine. I actually had Joe from the Lakeview student. He scored 100% on all of them. Yeah, I know. Probably shouldn't broadcast that. He was taught really well. I'm not sure I could score 100% on it, frankly. I should get at least high 90s, right? You would think.
Probably.
I would hope. But that's the baseline. The other thing I will tell you is those same tests that you took, we're going to come back and retake them at the end of the course, and you should all see a big score improvement. That was kind of the point of that. If you haven't done it yet, please go ahead and do it. There will be no late penalty if it's late. Because the point, it's not punitive, okay? It's not like a punitive kind of thing. All right, so topics we're going to talk about, and I am going to pull up the PowerPoint, and we're going to get rolling here. The other thing I'm going to ask you guys to do is 2 things. First of all, open up a file folder window or your Google Drive if that's what you're using. And also open up a basic text editor. I will be using Notepad++ today. I will tell you that I will be switching tools as we go, so you guys get exposure to different ones. Because frankly, it's a highly personal thing, what tool you use to do your work, frankly. It is, there's much better tools than Notepad++, but Notepad++ can frankly do it all. It's just a matter of what level of kind of hand-holding and beautification you need in the process. All coding is done with text files, folks. So you really don't need fancy tools. You really, really don't. All right. I'm going to take us to the PowerPoint, get rolling on this. And we'll talk about HTML. And I'm sure Wendy told you it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is it's not technically a programming language. So it's not like writing Java code or Python code. It's a markup language. Where it extends from, it actually extends from the print world, believe it or not. Back in the 80s when they started to switch from hand setting type, I don't know if you guys ever even saw that, like I actually, when I was in junior high school, I took a typesetting class, and we take these little lead pieces of type, and you put them in upside down, all in a row, and you build your text, you put spacers in, and then you'd ink it, and it'd go through a machine, and then it would press it on the paper, and that's how you printed back then. Even big newspapers were printed that way. And then they switched to electronic pre-press, where people would type stuff up on a computer, and then they would send it to the press electronically. But, on a newspaper, sometimes you have headings, and sometimes you have bold and italics, and you have paragraphs and all these things. And they came up with this approach of using tags marked with the same brackets you see here to indicate bold, italic, paragraphs, headings, all that stuff. So it originated from the print world, and that original technology was called SGML. And I forget what it stands for, Standardized Graphic Markup Language or something like that. From there, HTML borrowed its idea. Because if they're putting it on paper, well, we're just putting it on screen. So somebody who developed this came up with that idea, and that's why we have what we have. So HTML5, of course, I just told you that just became a standard in 2014. Although some of the major browsers like Firefox and Chrome were supporting it years before. In fact, they were big developers of it. And then in 2014, the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, finally standardized it, which was a blessing, really. Now, the interesting thing is that the previous version of HTML that was the approved standard was not called HTML. This is pretty fascinating. It was actually called XHTML. And I'm writing this on the board here. People online can't see it. So we went from XHTML 1.0 and 1.1 to HTML5. And what came before XHTML was HTML4, which kind of was concurrent with XHTML. And then, of course, there was version 1 and 2 and 3. Guess which one I first learned? 1. And the funny thing in that version, when you wrote your tags, they all had to be capital letters. Yeah. Not anymore. Okay, just so you know. So we're going to follow completely the new HTML5 standard. And now that it's a standard, we don't call it really HTML5 anymore. We just call it HTML. Okay. When we brought that standard into play, it really developed a lot of things for us. But the most important part of any HTML document is the very first line of the document. It's the thing we call the doc type declaration. So I'm going to actually go right to my Notepad++ here. I'm going to give it a little bit of a zoom. And if you guys have a new document open, wait. Right? I'm stopping you dead in your tracks. Because here I'm just going to go jump in and code. Wrong answer. File management first, save your file, then code. So that's why I opened up a file window before. So first I need to figure out where the heck am I going to put this. For this semester, I'm actually going to drop it in my Google Drive. So I'm going to go to Web Programming 1, and I may have done this last week, so we'll find out. And then I'm going to create a folder. No, I guess I didn't. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call mine 2019, or not summer, fall. Darn, I wish it was summer. Because I teach the same course many semesters, so that for me, I'll know when it was. I'm going to go into that folder, and you might already have this because you're doing this for the web orientation class, right? You might have a folder called Web Programming 1. And now I'm going to create a new folder, and we're in Unit 2, right? There was really no coding in Unit 1. There were other types of assignments. I'm going to call it Unit 2. And notice I'm not including any spaces, are you guys seeing this? In the name of the folder. Because there's a strategy here. The strategy is this. when you work on your local file system, you might use capital letters and spaces, but you know what? Because it just looks better. But when you move it up to a web server, when you FTP it, web servers, it's not that they won't work with spaces, it makes for really messy looking URLs. And on some rare occasions, it just doesn't work. If the server is turned, there's a little feature, there's a little checkbox in a config setting where it turns off the feature and spaces don't work. And some admins flip it. So my recommendation to you is to get your files and folders ready for upload on your machine before you actually upload them via FTP. So that means, okay, convention, you know, is really kind of the word here. It's not like a forced thing. The convention is no spaces. The other convention that I use personally is I typically avoid uppercase letters for folder names. Why? Because that way I just know there's no caps in it. There will be times when you change that, but the web is case sensitive. So if you, as some of you probably have already discovered, index HTML with a capital I doesn't work. So that one always has to be all lowercase. It's just a good convention to follow. And the other thing I do, frankly, as well, is if I have like multiple words in a file name, instead of using a space, I put a dash in. Some people will capitalize the first letter of each word. It's really kind of up to you. But whatever format you use, be consistent and know what your format is. I recommend all lowercase, no space, because that's what I've done for years, and I think a lot of pros do the same thing, and it just seems to work pretty well. All right. So I'm going to go into that folder. I'm just kind of moving it aside now, second screen, out of the way. Now that I'm back in my document, first thing I'm going to do is a save as, and I'm going to drop it in that folder, so I got to go find it. So for me, it's my G drive, my drive, Web 1, and then 2019 Fall, Unit 2, and yes, we are calling this index.html, all lowercase, exactly spelled that way. Let me explain why we do that. When you guys go to a website, pick a website, coca-cola.com, right? Do you type coca-cola.com/index.html? No. You just type coca-cola.com because it automatically looks for index.html. That's the why. So if you want it to automatically load, it's got to be called exactly that. All right, let's go ahead and put in that doc type declaration now. And you just say doc type HTML, all lowercase. Did I do it right? I'm missing something. What am I missing?
Bang. Bang.
The bang.
Bang.
I don't know that term.
Exclamation
Yes, where?
before the V.
Yes. Like this. All right. Now, the reason we put this at the top of every HTML document is very simple. The first thing the browser looks at when it receives the file is this line, and it says, which rule set are we following? Oh, doc type HTML, that means HTML5, gotcha. That's it. That's the whole point of it. All right, I'm going to go back now to the PowerPoint really quick, and I'm going to show you what we used to have to do. When we did XHTML, we had to type all of this in. Guess how many programmers ever memorized that? Like none, right? So what you would do is you were either using a program like Dreamweaver or something like that, where it would, like, you would just create the page and it would drop it in automatically, or you'd go out to Google each time and Google it and find it and paste it in. So one of the reasons they got rid of that is because, frankly, it was just a pain. It also gave you a little bit of a clue, though, because the truth is the doc type for HTML still has actually a direct file link to W3, indicating what the rule set is, but it's embedded into the browser now, so we don't have to type it. But in the previous versions of HTML and XHTML, you had to put that in order for it to follow the rule set. And then the problem with the older versions was twofold. Notice that XHTML 1.0 transitional allowed for old style tags and new style tags to be intermixed. And then there was also a strict version, which sometimes you had to use in order to make stuff work at all. And it was really kind of a pain. And HTML5 kind of handles both beautifully. And in many cases, you can take your old web pages that have this doc type or other ones, switch it to HTML5, and you know what? It still works. That's the beauty. All right, and important to know. Knowing why the doc type is there is pretty critical, frankly. You know, hint, hint on a test. That will definitely be on a test. Why do we put the doc type at the top? Because it tells the browser what rule set we're following, period. In the old days, if you didn't put that in, the browser would go into what was called quirks mode and did whatever the hell it wanted. And that's why some pages worked in some browsers and some wouldn't at all. All right. So now we have the basic structure of a web page here up on screen. And I know you guys did this last week, but I'm going to start building it, and I'm going to talk about it as we go. The first thing that we do is we add an HTML tag, and then right away I close it. And you guys probably learned already that this is kind of the format for doing HTML tags. So whatever your tag is, it goes inside those brackets. That's what they're called, left bracket, right bracket. And then everything that's in between the opening one and the closing one belongs to that tag. And so there's like these layers of encapsulation that happen. And one really important thing is whenever you open a tag, you have to make sure you close it. There are some tags, though, that are self-closing, where you don't have to list the closing tag. And I'll show you those when we get there. Now, the PowerPoint, notice how it says language equals EN. And technically, you really should do this with it.
I always thought by when you just put it in there for good practice, honestly.
It is. The benefit that we have being here in the States is, you know, the web is coded in English, so we kind of really don't have to declare it. However, if you do create websites that are multilingual, and some people do that, right? Did you ever go to a website, you can like translate it to Spanish or French or German or something? That's where this kicks in, because you can override that, switch languages, load different alphabet sets and things like that. The next major section of the page is called the head section. And as soon as we open it, and if you're ever typing this stuff by hand, I always tell students, open and close your tags first, then put the stuff inside. Okay, just a helpful tip. If you use a better IDE, meant for doing web coding, as soon as you type the first one and finish it, it puts the second one in for you automatically. And I'll show you tools that do that. And you know what? Once you see those, you'll probably prefer it. The other major section of the document is the body section. Once again, put that / in to indicate that it's closing. Now, in general, in these sections, this is what happens. The head section of the document is stuff that's important for the functionality of the document and provides stuff that really mostly happens behind the scenes. You might put CSS in there to style your page, script files to make it do something, special directives to link it to certain things, etc. The body section typically is the visible portion of the page, what the person looking at the screen is seeing. There are some exceptions, but that's generally the rule. All right? There's a couple little things that we typically throw in, and you see, I'm going to kind of pull it over here like this. to show you how to do it. All right. First thing that typically goes inside the head section, and I'm going to actually indent a couple of spaces here because to me that helps it look a little clearer, is what we call the title section. This is one of the exceptions in the head in terms of what's visible to the user. Whatever I type in the title is what appears on the browser tab within your browser. So the first few letters or words of that are the most important part, because you can make this really long, but you guys know, like, the more tabs you have open, the less you see of it. So make sure that whatever the first part of it is the most important. So I'm going to call this HTML basics. The book also adds in this thing called a meta tag. Once again, this is one of those that's actually optional. However, it's considered good practice, so I want you guys to do it. Any good development tool that you would use that automatically creates HTML files will throw this in. The character set UTF-8 indicates the standard ASCII key set or code set for US English standard keyboards, what all web pages typically are created with. However, if you are working in a foreign country, there might be times where you switch to UTF-16 or some other weird cryptic one in order to be able to add other language characters inside your HTML code. Okay? So for the most part, you know, being here on English-speaking soil, you guys won't have to worry about it. I think we are looking at more of a multilingual future, though, folks, right? United States, I mean, you know, probably in 20, 30 years, Spanish is going to be as popular as English, right? And if you're not learning Spanish, you probably should, right? At least how to say cerveza or something like that. So that's something to think about. But think about the Hispanic language, though. They use all the same letters we do. It's still a Latin alphabet. The difference is they have some characters that are different. They have, like, some upside down punctuation marks and accents. That's really the takeaway. You can actually pull all that stuff in using UTF-8. It's all in there. You just have to know the key codes to use. All right. Next thing we do is put our content in here. Now, we don't have any content yet, so let's just type hello world. You have to do that at least once in your life, right? We did it in Python, we're doing it in HTML. And the other thing that I just did off screen is I pressed Control S to save, because you see my icon is red, unsaved. Control S turns to blue. It is now saved. We can now jump back to our file folder. Of course, it's on the other screen. Here it is. Give it a double click and it should load up in your browser.
You can also hit up to the right corner too, and you're running Chrome.
Yes, we'll talk about that, Cordy. Absolutely. What Cordy is pointing out, there is a menu within Notepad++, the Run menu, where you can go in and choose which browser you want to try it in. So if I wanted to launch it in Firefox, I could click on Firefox, launches Firefox, and does the same thing. With the level of stuff that we're doing now, there's not going to be really a lot of need for checking different browsers for output. But when you start doing stuff that's much more detail-oriented and graphical, you really do need to start going browser to browser to make sure it looks good. Because you can never really predict what your users are going to be looking at it with. All right, let's move on. All right. Something I already said. This information in the head section is kind of like typically hidden from the user. The exception is the title, because that appears up in the tab. But what the users see goes in the body section. All right, we just did all this. And everybody's okay, right? No issues? Fantastic. Now we're going to learn our first in-document thing, and my guess is that most of you got about this far last time. Is that about right? Yeah. And so there is a little repeat here. And remember when I was talking about like the whole thing with the newspapers, and how like when you print a newspaper you have a heading for an article, and then you might have like little asides and the author link and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of this stuff comes from that. So a lot of the terminology and the thinking comes from that environment. I'm going to get rid of that hello world, and I'm going to indent a couple of spaces, and I'm going to type in the H1 tag. And I know you guys have done this already. And I'm trying to think of what's my topic going to be. Well, it could be HTML basics, but I'm thinking I need a topic to run with for the semester. And I always tend to pick TV shows or sports, right? I told you guys that. I think I'm actually going to go back to doing Mr. Robot, because it's about to come out again. And it's a crazy good show for IT people to watch. And the other reason I'm picking this is it gives me a topic, right? So I have some sort of a theme to work with, and then I can go out and find graphics and images and stuff that'll look cool, you know. So I'm going to put Mr. Robot in there. All right. I know you guys did some of this last week too, so I don't mean to belittle your knowledge in any way, shape, or form, but there's multiple levels of headings. I forget what their tagline is. I think it's like, our democracy has been hacked, I think is what it is. And if it's not, I'll fix it. Now you did learn last week with Wendy that the headings basically do what you have here, right? They take you from different sizes on down. Now, in terms of the practical functionality of all these different heading levels, they have 6 different levels. When you get down past 3, they're kind of useless, frankly. That's my opinion. So I rarely go past level 2. So I usually use 1 and 2, and then 3, it's like, okay, that's almost regular size of text, why bother? Okay, but one of the reasons you use these heading tags is not just to change the appearance of the text. The real reason that we use different tags is for what we call the semantic web. And this is a really important concept in web design. The semantic web means that the tags describe what the content is, so that way when the browser is reading it and when Google is indexing it, they know what's important. Because I could take any paragraph and apply a style to it and make the font big and bold, just like heading 1 is, but it wouldn't tell Google that that's what's important on the page. The reason we use the heading tag really more so is to let the browser and the search engines know what's important, what kind of content it is. That's called the semantic web. So we put 2 tags in there. We haven't looked at them yet, have we? Let's go ahead and do a Control S to save. If you're on a Mac, Command S works. Or you can click the icon, whatever works for you. Let's take a quick look. I'll do the run thing. Let's go Chrome. Pretty basic, but there it is. See the 2 levels. The other thing that you should do, and you want to get in the habit of doing this, folks, is now that we're on the page, give it a right click. Not on top of any of the text, but somewhere in a blank area, and choose View Page Source. And then, of course, we can actually come in here and look at the code that we just sent to the browser. Simple HTML code, like the stuff we're creating in this class, will be completely visible to your users if they choose to see it. So a lot of web pages that are hand-coded, you can go to them, right-click, view source, and see exactly what they did to create the content you're looking at. So if you ever go see something and go, wow, that's really amazing, how did they do that? Well, right-click, view source. The CSS is there, the JavaScript is there, and the HTML is there. What you cannot see though, and there are things that you cannot see, is what tools they use in the background to automatically generate that code in some cases. Because sometimes the stuff is not hand-coded. It's automatically generated. Okay, so that's important to know as well. All right, so our democracy has been hacked. I'm resetting my zoom level back to 100%. Shortcut key for that, folks, is Control-0 on a PC. I forget what it is for a Mac. It might be Command-0.
Command U, sir.
Command U? Okay. Well, thank you for refreshing my memory. All right. Now we're going to put in a paragraph tag. Once again, I'm going to indent a little bit and add a paragraph tag. Now, I don't want to just throw in any junky content here. Since I have a theme I'm working with, I'm going to actually go borrow some content from the web. In fact, I'm just going to grab it right from here. This looks good. Right? Some Wikipedia. So here I have a paragraph of text, and I'm going to go ahead and close this. Oops, like so. Let's go ahead and save this once again, and let's do a run, if that's how you choose to do it. And now I have a heading 1, a heading 2, and a paragraph. Everybody okay? Am I moving too fast? Anything you want me to slow down or repeat? Or any questions?
Doesn't matter where you put the paragraph tag.
In terms of?
Like you have the text under it and stuff, because I read somewhere on that W3 schools had to give it below it to the letter P, I mean the paragraph tag.
Let me repeat that one more time. The question in class was, do I have to have it like right after the paragraph tag? And so, for some of you, you think it might look better if you did this. And then if you save that, go back to your browser and refresh, you notice it is not moving because the additional white space is functionally ignored. Here's another interesting aspect of this. Here I have one space, right? And clearly that space is present in the document. It's right there. If I add an additional space, heck, if I had a whole bunch, and save it, that should show up, right?
No.
Guess what? It doesn't. Yeah, so what happens is the text inside of a paragraph, or really any text, one space renders. To force additional spaces, you have to use special character codes to do it. This is not a flaw, this is by design. But you have to know that. So the way that you format the text inside of Notepad++ has no bearing on what you're seeing on the screen. And that's a little uncomfortable at first, because you're used to a word processor, right, that does do that. Now you can leverage that, of course, in a lot of different ways. So it allows you to make your code look nice and neat in a way that's comfortable for you, but it doesn't necessarily affect the output to the user. The other thing that I'm not sure why I'm thinking about it now, but for some of you, you might not have this thing called word wrap turned on, and you might be getting this effect, right, where that paragraph is like, oh, and because you know what, it's all on one line. But if you go to your view menu, whatever tool you're using, somewhere in the program settings they usually have a word wrap so that if it is all on one line, it doesn't fly off the screen. So, all right, well, how about this then? What if, I don't want to use word wrap, and I press enter at the end of each line and create a separate line, and I save it.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, that's not going to change anything either.
If you wanted a new line, you could use any line. I use the VR.
Yeah, we're going to get there, Jordy. Okay, it's one step at a time. So these are things you need to be functionally conscious of. Now, what Cordy, I'm sorry, I called you Jordy, Cordy, is pointing out is some of the stuff that's just coming up right down the line here. So we're going to get there in just a sec. And guess what's next, right? If you do want to force a line, that's where you can use the line break element. So if I go back to here, and let's say I want to put a line break after this sentence, I can just type in the BR tag, and the BR tag is the first of our elements that we're going to learn that is self-closing. Okay? It's a self-closing tag, meaning I don't need a closing version of it to close it. Let's see what it does, and then I'm going to show you a couple alternatives here as well. So when I do the refresh, did I save it? Save and refresh. Did it work?
No.
No, it didn't work.
Did you ever get a carry some?
No, I'm going to relaunch it. Oh, actually, it worked just fine. Okay, where's the line break? Hackers to join their organization, right? Hackers to join their organization, where it's at the end of the line. So if I do this, make the screen just a little bit smaller, now you see it. But you notice it's one single line break. It only goes down one line. It's not going down two lines like what's happening with the heading tags. If I wanted to go down two lines, guess what? Got to use two line breaks. Now that may or may not be what you want to do, but hey, let's just do it anyhow. Saving, refreshing, now it's down two lines. But now visually the effect is the same as having a paragraph, frankly. But there are times that you want to do that because you want to keep all the stuff inside that paragraph associated to each other, and you're just trying to control spacing. That's really what it's for. All right? That's the line break element. What's fascinating about this line break element is in the old days when we were doing XHTML, XHTML was based upon XML. And XML was a rewrite of all markup languages, which is now used to write all markup languages. And the thing about XML is it was a very, very strict rule set. And the rule set said any tag that's open must be closed. So the way that we just did the line break was not acceptable. In the XHTML days, what we would do is this. All these line breaks would have to do this. Oops. You have to throw that in there. And that still works in HTML5. So if you ever encounter any web pages in your life where you see line breaks like that, that's due to XHTML. There's also some circumstances, even in modern web page development, when you are using certain back-end code, like if you're working with Java, for example, so when you guys get to your Java 2 class, that you have to do this to make the application work. Otherwise it won't read, because Java wants it to be strict too. So that's just something to note. Right, moving on. Now let's get to this element here. And once again, keep in mind, all this stuff draws from the print world. So if you ever read a book, right, and you get a quote from somebody, the quote, usually you put quotation marks around it, and you put a citation in. And there's rules for it. So like if it's just a couple of words, you just put it in line. So like for example, if let's say, this is a quote, just this part of it, and actually technically it would go here. It's just a few words, you leave it there and it just sits. But if you get a quote from somebody that extends 4 lines of text on a page, and you should learn this in English class, you're supposed to indent it, separate it, and it's called a block quote. Well, HTML's got a structure for it. So what I'm going to do, just for demonstration's sake, is I'm going to take this whole paragraph that we have, I'm going to copy it, right? And then in between, I'm going to create a block quote. So go ahead and just type that in right away. Close your tag. All right. And then I'm going to go out to the web once again because I really don't want to type content that's nonsense. And why don't we pull up the whole Wikipedia article, wherever that is. And why am I using Wikipedia? Because they don't care if you copy paste. Frankly, you know. Don't use it for your research papers though, right? I'm going to get rid of that little 9. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to paste it in here. I am going to put quotes around it because it does come from somewhere else. And I'm actually going to say, maybe in parentheses, you know, from Wikipedia. I'm saving my work. Let's go back to our browser and let's do a refresh. And there's your block quote. Now if you look at this carefully, what's going on is it is indented from both sides, so it's not at the margins. It is also treated like a paragraph in the spacing above and below. So there's one blank line above and one blank line below. And it's indented. It's just a block quote. All right. In this next little section here, we're going to look at some phrase elements. So I'm going to start going through these one by one and try all of them. And you know what? Hint, hint, this is part of your homework, so I want you to try it. Okay? And you can do it just the way I'm doing it. We're going to go one at a time, and almost all of these, with the exception of 2, extend from the print world once again. And this, I have always like this little interesting side story I tell. The very first word processor that I got to use, somebody gave me an Apple IIe back in the 80s. Like, they must have been made of money or something, right? You know, they paid a whole bunch of money for this computer, and then they bought like a Macintosh instead of an Apple, and they gave me their Apple. And I didn't know anything about computers back then, but it did come with, on floppy disk, 5 1/4 inch, the Quark word processor. One of the first word processors. And in that program, and for me it was revelatory because I was in school at the time and I would have to type papers. And you know how I did that? Like on a typewriter, right? There's no autocorrect, there's no like misspelling underlines, and initially you couldn't correct anything, and then eventually I got erasable paper, and then even later I got the ribbon that you could switch to like white ink so you could like go back over and retype over your letters if you made a mistake, you know, that kind of thing. But you couldn't like bold or italic or any of that kind of stuff, right? And then when I got the Quark word processor, all of a sudden it's like, wait, I can cut and paste and move this stuff around, and it has spell checker built in, and I could like take exactly these types of tags and mark up my text. But the way that they did it in Quark was a little b to start and a capital B to finish, or vice versa, I forget. It was one direction, and that was their way of doing opening and closing tags. So if you wanted something bold, I was like, I was brilliant. Because for whatever time you took to write out your paper by hand and then type it in, because it was required, it saved me all this time because now I could just compose right on the computer screen. And then, you know, like you read something, you go, you know, this paragraph is stupid here, it belongs up here, you know. How revelatory it was, and you guys never have had to experience that. I mean, you type like a 5-page paper and it would take you like a whole freaking weekend. I'm not kidding, you know, so. What do you mean I have to type a 5-page paper? You guys, you guys have it so easy. All right, let's go one by one. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is the bold tag. And I'm just going to go to my first paragraph here. And I'm going to make Elliot bold. And all I have to do that is use the B and close it. So now Elliot should be bold. So I'm going to save, flip over, refresh, and look, Elliot is bold. Right? Now you notice in the PowerPoint that the tag below it is called M, and that stands for emphasized text. Functionally on the screen, it will have the exact same effect as bold. This was introduced when XHTML was introduced. They said, don't use bold, that's dumb. It should be emphasized, not bold. That was their thinking, right? So it works just like bold. However, once again, has a different semantic meaning than bold. Bold makes it bold. Emphasized means it's important. Although I would say bold means it's important too, right? So you see the conundrum here? What I've done since HTML5 brought the bold tag back is I've just gone back to the bold tag, folks. Very simply. You know, so, but both of them worked just fine, and you do need to know both of them, but you'll see that they have a different effect. Oh, wait a second. It didn't bold it at all. What did it do to it? Italicized it. Okay, so here's the trick. The one that actually makes it bold is this other one. Strong. That's at the bottom of the list. Those two should be put together on the slide, by the way. Not my slide. Okay? Save it. Back to the document. Refresh. Now you see what bold, M, and strong do. Let's make mysterious italics. We'll use the I. So functionally, folks, italics and M's go together. So italic, this is italic, this is an M, this is a bold, and that is a strong. So strong and bold, functionally the same. Emphasis in italics, functionally the same. Use whichever one you're comfortable with. My feeling is I go back to the old school ones. Why? Because it's less code. For as silly as that sounds, it's less code to type. HTML5 doesn't care. Let's try some of the other ones. You can also use the mark tag, and look what that does. It creates like a highlight. Not really a huge fan of using this one because, well, frankly, I think it's a little hideous. I could see how it could be used, like if I was demonstrating how to highlight a document, I suppose. You could use that, so I just put it on the from Wikipedia thing.
How do you write it then?
You just use the mark.
All right.
Mark tag. Going to move on to the next example. Remember, if I'm going too fast, you can always come back to this slide or to the video. The next one is the small tag. Well, guess what small does? Yes, it makes things small. And, you know, I will tell you with the small tag, I'm just trying to find something that is appropriate to make small, like the word corporation, I think is a good one. No social commentary there, by the way. But the question you should have, is there also a large? Yes. There's also extra small, extra large, extra extra small, and extra extra large. And you know what? I don't think that's really a good way to size your text, but if you need to do it quick and fast and just get it done, that works. All right? And just to show you that there is a large, let's just drop a large in there too. Oh, it's not liking it. Right? Maybe I'm wrong. Big. Is that what it is? Yeah, big. Thank you. Small, big. shows how often I use it, frankly, Joe. Which is basically never. I never put this in my code, just so you know. So they're showing you stuff that's out there, but you know, the practical functionality of it. All right, can you find them? Where's small? I made the word corporation is small, and then resist is big. I don't know, that's like barely visible on that screen, right? It is, yeah. I wouldn't use it. All right. All right, 2 more to try, sub and super. So, if well, we got a perfect spot for a sub and a super. Here's one, right? So we have a citation here. I could make that citation a sub, but I want you to watch how I do this because I want to apply it to something that's already got a tag on it. What I have to make sure I do is if I start it before another tag, I have to finish it after that tag, right? So I would need to place it like this. I would not want to put it here. That's what we call improper encapsulation. It might still work, but really it isn't what you want to do. You want it like that. I'm going to save that, refresh. Now you see how it just bumped down a little bit? And you know what? A citation like that would probably actually benefit from a small, because do they really need to be that big? Then that also would need to be properly encapsulated. And in that effect, I'll go back to the code. The other tag that's left on the page, the super, that's, instead of dropping it down towards the bottom of the text, it just lifts it up towards the top. Okay? And I encourage you guys to do that on your own. It is required for your homework. I'm not going to type it in here.
What is it?
Super, S-U-P. So this stands for subscript, and S-U-P stands for superscript. Or do you really, really want me to do it? Here, I'll tell you what. I'll put in this, and then I'll type in S-U-P, like so. I'm going to save it. I'm going to refresh. I will go back to the code, but you see how I made it superscript? Which is exactly what they're doing on Wikipedia, right? Except they also make it a link, but whatever. That's not my goal here. All right, for those of you here in class right now, I'm taking a pause. We are doing a break, okay? We did a lot of coding in a short period of time. All right? People watching at home, you should probably do the same. We did an hour of this straight, so good time to take a break.